In this insider knowledge, I show you how to reveal the special film mode hidden inside FilmConvert. We take the standard FilmConvert emulation and strip back the layers, revealing the amazing colour science underneath. The story of this video actually started over 5 years ago with the initial launch of FilmConvert standalone. Back in the day, not only did you have access to the standard film emulations, but right in this area here was a drop-down list that allowed you to select an alternate emulation mode called Status M. Without going into too much detail, Status M densitometry is used to measure the density of non-print films such as colour negative film. In simple terms, it's the data that's produced by a film scanner when scanning colour negative film. This is a standard FilmConvert emulation here, and this is the Status M version of the same image. Notice that it looks closer to a film negative scan, as that's essentially what it's emulating. Status M features in FilmConvert as it seems the matching between the cameras and motion picture stocks is carried out in Status M density. It does, however, have a different spectral response compared to images we normally work with, therefore we need to transform it. This is Status M transformed into print density. And now a simple Cineon to Rec. 709 gamma transform gets us to here. By accessing the Status M emulations of the print stocks, we bypass FilmConvert's print lookup table, which is usually too contrasty. This gives us full control of the contrast curve and access to the purer colours living underneath. The Status M emulations were eventually removed from FilmConvert as it moved out of the beta phase. Luckily I managed to rip them out as LUTs. I've used them on several projects in the last 5 years, such as this commercial I DP'd for the pitch segment on the Gruen TV show. However, about 2 years ago, I discovered the Status M emulations actually live on, albeit somewhat hidden. At this point, I've got some bad news and some good news. The bad news is, the Status M mode only exists for Red MX sensors. The good news is, if you stick with me, I'll show you how to make it work with your camera. The first thing you need to do is download the camera profile that contains the Status M LUTs. They can be found in the Red 1 camera profile. Install the profiles, then navigate to where they are stored. Then find the Epic M folder. The motion picture stocks have the letters SM after them, which obviously stands for Status M. We'll replace the existing 5207, but first we'll back it up. Then delete SM from the file name and you're good to go. You can also rename the other stocks, but for now we'll concentrate on 5207. Inside Resolve, add the FilmConvert plugin and select the Epic M camera profile. Notice that it requires Red Color 2 and Red Gamma as the input. So now we'll change our camera raw settings to match. At this point, make sure you're using Red Color Science version 2, as Red Color 2 and Red Gamma don't exist in version 3. So now you've got a Status M image. The only problem with using Red Gamma is that overexposure results in posterization of the highlights. This is due to some limitations in the emulation. However, there are ways around this. Probably the easiest method is to create our own conversion from Red Log Film to Red Gamma. This allows us to control the roll-off into the highlights. You can follow along, but I will provide a power grade of this entire node graph. So using Red Log Film as our base, we are going to create a curve that takes us into Red Gamma. This still here is what Red Color 2 and Red Gamma looks like. At this point, we're able to change to the version 3 or IPP2 color science, as we no longer need the legacy color spaces or gammas. Rather than watch me recreate this curve, I'm just going to drag it from an existing still. Now we need to convert the red wide gamut color space into Red Color 2. This is super simple using the Color Space Transform plugin. Red wide gamut is the input color space and Red Color 2 is the output. Comparing it to our Red Color 2 Red Gamma still shows us a close enough match for now. Next, what we want to do is control the roll-off into the highlights. The idea here is to limit values from exceeding the point where posterization starts. Yes, this will limit the accuracy of the emulation, but don't worry too much, as an emulation based on a contrasty curve such as Red Gamma was never very accurate to begin with. So rather than redrawing this curve, I'm just going to drag and drop it from the final look. Notice the way the curve limits the maximum values. Now that we've got our updated Red Gamma curve, let's get back into Status M mode. Add the FilmConvert plugin and select the Epic M camera profile. The next step is to convert Status M into print density. This is done via a 3x3 matrix. Researching this step led me to this document here. And on page 5, we find the matrix required to convert to print density. Entering these values into the RGB mixer looks like this. You can try these values, but after some testing, I modified them slightly. So now I'll bring over the matrix from the final grade. And this is what my values look like. There is a little bit of guesswork and a lot of testing, but in reality, only the developers would be able to supply the correct values. For a more neutral response, you can also give these values a try. Next, I'm going to bring in a curve to compensate for dropping our highlights in the previous conversion. At the same time, this also gets us closer to our start red log film gamma. And if I toggle the entire node graph on and off, you can see we're pretty close to red log film. Next, I'll add a color space transform node at the end to get us into Rec 709 gamma. Cineon film log as the input, which is identical to red log film, and of course Rec 709 as the output. And then switch on luminance mapping. If you need to balance your image, create a node right at the start before all the conversions. This allows you to do your correction in red wide gamut and red log film. In this case, I'm just going to add a little bit of saturation. A good way to think about it is that corrections happen before the negative emulation, and grading happens after the negative emulation. So if I was going to apply a look to this footage, I'd do it right at the end, just before our Rec 709 conversion. So at this point you might be asking yourself, how accurate is this emulation? How does it stack up to real film? Luckily, we're actually able to do this comparison. These two frames are from cinematography.net. They are from a camera test directly comparing film to digital. This frame is Red Epic MX, and this frame is Kodak 5207, which coincidentally is the same film stock we are emulating. You'll notice a slight difference in contrast and exposure between the film and Red Epic MX. Because our film conversion begins and then ends in red log film prior to getting converted into Rec 709, I'm going to bring the contrast and exposure of the film to match red log film. Then I can use the same Rec 709 color space transform node. So looking at the waveform, I'm going to keep adjusting till I get a close match. And this looks close enough here. Then I'll apply the finished emulation from the previous section onto the Red MX clip. Then I'll reset the camera raw settings as I'm no longer compensating to the tint of the ND filters I was using on the previous shot. Then to keep the comparison equal, I'm going to use the same Rec 709 conversion on the film scan. Flicking between both shots shows a pretty close match. This is pretty incredible considering that this film versus digital test was shot years after FilmConvert shot their film. It was also shot by different DPs using different lenses, processed at different film labs, and scanned by two different scanners, yet the results are not far off. To show you how close they are, and to give you a point of reference, I'll now show you what the IPP2 version of this image looks like. First I'll grab a still of the emulation. Now I'll apply the grade from this still, and this is IPP2. And then comparing it to the film scan, it's obvious the film emulation is a lot closer. I'm not saying you can't get close with the IPP2 colour science, but this is closer straight out of the box. So what if you don't shoot with the Epic MX? Well, there is a way to give the emulation a try, but there are some limitations. And really, for this workflow to be useful on other cameras, FilmConvert really needs to come to the party. So this is an Arri Alexa frame, also from the same cinematography.net test. I'll apply the emulation node graph, get the exposure back to where it was, then add a color space transform node. Now I need to convert the color space and gamma into what the emulation is expecting. For the inputs, you need to select the color space and gamma that matches your footage. In this case, it's the Alexa color space and Arri log C. And for the output, we need to select red wide gamut and red log film. Now if you compare it to the film scan, you will notice we're not actually very close. This is starting to show the limitations of this method. Even though we're converting color spaces to match, any differences in the way two sensors perceive color will likely persist after the color space transform node, and will be visible in the emulation. In this case, the Alexa appears slightly greener when compared to the MX footage. Adding a little bit of red and magenta using the offset wheel will get us closer. But it's still not going to be 100%, as the emulation isn't expecting colors from the Alexa sensor. Really, the only way that this method would be useful for the vast majority of people is if FilmConvert comes to the party. It would be great if they released versions of their emulations without the print lookup applied. This doesn't need to be status M, in fact, print density versions would be preferable. So what can you do? Well, you can get in contact with FilmConvert and let them know you want print density versions. Link them to this video if you must, and with a little bit of luck, they might just come through. That's it for this episode. If you found it useful, make sure you share it.